She was never supposed to see combat. For the first few years of her career, Captain Sarah Jenkins' world was a world of inventory spreadsheets, delivery schedules, and the relentless pressure of making sure a battalion of hungry, tired soldiers had everything from bootlaces to tank treads. As a supply officer, her battlefield was the logistics depot, her weapons were a clipboard and a radio, and her war was fought against the clock and the desert dust that clogged every engine air filter in Iraq. It was the spring of 2004, and Sarah was stationed at Forward Operating Base, FOB Caldwell, a sprawling, dusty installation nestled near the volatile city of Bakbah. The 82nd Airborne had a stranglehold on the city, but the insurgents were growing bolder, harassing supply convoys and planting IEDs along the treacherous routes. Sarah, a West Point graduate who had been shuffled into the Logistics Corps due to a surplus of infantry officers that year, often felt a nagging sense of unfulfillment. She was a soldier trained to fight, yet her days were spent counting cases of water and arguing with truck drivers. Her M9 service pistol, standard issue for officers, was so clean it looked brand new. Her unit, the 53rd Support Battalion, was the lifeblood of the FOB. Without them, the fighters couldn't fight. Sarah took pride in her work, knowing that a well-supplied soldier was an effective soldier. But late at night, under the hum of the generators, she would trace the outline of the mountains on her map, wondering if she would ever have to prove herself in the way the Rangers and paratroopers did every day. That chance, or perhaps that curse, has arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The call came over the tactical radio, frantic and crackling with static. A routine resupply convoy, escorted by a platoon of Rangers from the 3rd Battalion, had been ambushed in the narrow, winding streets of a village just south of the Diyala River. The initial reports were confusing and terrifying. Multiple IEDs, small arms fire from rooftops, and at least one RPG that had disabled the lead Humvee. The Rangers were pinned down, taking casualties, and their medic had been hit in the opening seconds of the attack. The duty officer ran into the supply office, his face pale. "Jenkins, they're scrambling anyone who can hold a rifle. The QRF, Quick Reaction Force, is spinning up, but they're 10 minutes out. They need cover. Now." Sarah looked at the 2 young privates in her office. They were clerks, so not infantry. They looked back at her with wide, terrified eyes. "You two, stay here, lock the door, and if anyone comes through that gate that isn't American, you know what to do," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. She grabbed her helmet, her flak jacket, and her M16, which she had personally zeroed at the range just the week before, much to the amusement of the Rangers who thought it was cute that a pogue, a derogatory term for non-combat troops, cared about accuracy. She sprinted toward the motor pool, where 2 Humvees were already roaring to life. A young Ranger sergeant, a man named Calhoun with a hardened face and kind eyes, was directing traffic. "Ma'am, you with us?" he yelled over the noise. "I'm all you've got, Sergeant," she replied, jumping into the gunner's position of the second vehicle. She swung the M240B machine gun around, the weight of it familiar from her training at West Point, though she'd never fired one in anger. "Ma'am, your supply, you know how to use that?" Calhoun asked, jumping into the driver's seat. "I can figure it out," she said, feeding a belt of ammunition into the receiver. The engine screamed, and the Humvee lurched forward, kicking up a cloud of dust as they tore through the FOB gates and onto the open road. The drive was a blur of date palms and mud brick walls. The radio chatter was a torrent of urgent calls. "Crusader 6, this is Viper 1-3. We are in a house on the east side of the market. We have 2 KIA, 3 WIA. They are everywhere. I say again, they are everywhere." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was the moment she had both dreaded and craved. But the Humvee skidded to a halt at the edge of the village. The crackle of AK-47 fire was immediate and unmistakable. Sergeant Calhoun was already out, moving toward a low wall. "Ma'am, stay on the 50! Cover our movement!" But Sarah wasn't staying in the truck. As the other soldiers dismounted and took cover behind a crumbling building, she saw the tactical situation unfold in her mind like a diagram from a field manual. The Rangers were pinned in a two-story structure about 100 meters down the main road. Insurgents were firing from rooftops, from windows, and from behind a barricade of burned-out cars. The Rangers' field of fire was limited. They couldn't get a bead on the shooters in the upper floors without exposing themselves. Her gunner's position was too low to see over the rooftops. She needed elevation. "Hey, Calhoun!" she shouted, sliding out of the turret and landing hard on the ground. "I'm going up!" She pointed to a half-constructed building beside them, a skeletal frame of concrete with a clear line of sight to the insurgent positions. Without waiting for a response, she ran, her boots pounding the dirt, her rifle held tight to her chest. Calhoun and another soldier laid down suppressing fire, the air crackling with the sound of bullets passing inches from her head. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her lungs burning. On the 3rd floor, she found a small balcony, open to the elements and offering a panoramic view of the kill zone below. She dropped to one knee, bringing her M16 to her shoulder. The scope settled on her eye. Below, the world dissolved into a series of isolated, crystal-clear snapshots. She could see the Rangers trapped in the house, their muzzles flashing from the windows. She could see the insurgents, their faces wrapped in keffiyehs, leaning out from a rooftop 50 meters away, raining fire down on the Americans. It was chaos, but to Sarah it suddenly became a shooting range. The targets were just targets. She took a deep breath, let it out halfway, and squeezed the trigger. Crack. The first insurgent, a man with an RPG launcher on his shoulder, crumpled. He never got the shot off. Crack. A second figure, firing an AK from behind a parapet, slumped forward, his weapon clattering to the street below. The Rangers below noticed the sudden drop in fire from above. They didn't know who it was, but they knew someone was helping. Calhoun, watching from his position, he saw the muzzle flash from the half-built building and realized with a shock that it was the supply officer. She was up there, alone, engaging the enemy with the precision of a trained sniper. Sarah moved her aim to the barricade of cars. An insurgent popped up to fire, and she dropped him before his finger could squeeze the trigger. A fourth, a fifth. She was in a zone, her body moving on autopilot, her mind quiet and focused. She counted her shots, conserved her ammunition, and made every round count. The insurgents began to panic. Their well-planned ambush was falling apart. They had accounted for the Rangers, but they hadn't accounted for the ghost on the 3rd floor. One by one, they fell. The ones who tried to flee were cut down by the Rangers, who, sensing the shift in momentum, had burst from their cover and were now advancing. In the span of less than 2 minutes, Sarah fired 11 shots. 11 shots. 11 insurgents lay dead or dying on the rooftops and in the street. The firing from the enemy positions ceased. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah lowered her rifle, her arms trembling from the adrenaline. She looked at the scene below, the smoke, the bodies, the Rangers moving cautiously through the debris, and she couldn't quite comprehend what she had just done. She was a supply officer. She counted blankets. She didn't do this. Sergeant Calhoun found her on the stairs, sitting down, staring at her hands. "Ma'am," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of respect. "Ma'am, we need to get you back to the FOB. The medics need to check you out." "I'm not hit," she said, her voice hollow. "I know," he said, offering her a hand. But you need to come with me." As they walked back to the Humvee, a young ranger, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, stopped and stared at her. He didn't say anything, but his eyes held a look of profound awe. He had seen it. They had all seen it. The supply officer with the clean pistol had just saved their lives. Back at the FOB, the debriefing was a blur. The battalion commander, a Colonel Matthews, personally came to the aid station to see her. He stood in the doorway, looking at the petite, exhausted woman sitting on a cot sipping water. "Captain Jenkins," he said, his voice gruff. "Sergeant Calhoun filed his report. He says you took out 11 enemy combatants. He says you turned the tide of that fight." Sarah looked up, her eyes tired. "Sir, I saw the angle. They couldn't see them from the ground. I just found a better spot." Colonel Matthews shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, that's not what just means. That's not what anyone does." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I'm putting you in for a commendation. But more than that, I'm putting in a request. We have a liaison position opening up with the Ranger Battalion. It's a tactical role, working with their planning staff. It's not supply. It's combat support. I think you'd be perfect for it." For the first time since the shooting stopped, a small, tired smile touched Sarah's lips. She had spent her entire career preparing to be a soldier, only to be told she was a clerk. Now, in the span of 11 flawless shots, she had finally become the soldier she was always meant to be. The story of the supply officer who fought like a ranger would spread through the FOB like wildfire, a legend born in the dust and fire of a forgotten Iraqi village. And for Sarah, it was not the end of her story, but the very beginning. The transfer to the Ranger liaison position was not a simple change of duty station. It was a metamorphosis. For Sarah, leaving the supply battalion felt like shedding a skin that never quite fit. The Rangers, initially skeptical of a logistics officer infiltrating their hallowed ranks, quickly learned to reserve judgment. The story of the 11 shots had preceded her, whispered in the chow halls and repeated in the barracks. But Sarah didn't want to be a legend. She wanted to be a soldier. She buried the memory of that day deep, focusing instead on the work at hand. Her new role was complex. She was the bridge between the Ranger Battalion's operational needs and the logistical behemoth of the conventional army. She planned fuel routes, coordinated ammunition resupply during extended patrols, and ensured that when the Rangers kicked down a door, they had the batteries for their night vision and the water to keep going. She was good at it, damn good, because she understood the rhythm of a firefight. She knew what a squad leader needed and when he needed it, not from a manual, but from the visceral memory of the taste of cordite and the panic of a pinned-down unit. The Rangers came to respect her not just for her past, but for her competence. She could ruck march with them, not always at the front, but never falling out. She could field strip an M240B in the dark, and she never, ever complained. And the hard lessons of the ambush had forged a new kind of steel in her. She had looked into the abyss and discovered she could stare back. 18 months after that day, Sarah's tour was ending. She had done her time, survived her war, and earned a chest full of ribbons, including a bronze star with a V device for valor that she rarely wore. The Army, in its infinite wisdom, offered her a choice: a comfortable staff job at the Pentagon or a slot at the Maneuver Captain's career course, the next step for officers bound for command. She chose the course. She wasn't ready to be done. But the ghosts of that spring day in 2004 weren't finished with her. They visited her at night, in the space between wakefulness and sleep. The faces of the men she had killed, seen so clearly through her scope, would blur into the faces of her fellow soldiers. She would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, the smell of dust and cordite filling her nostrils. She told no one. In the warrior culture she now inhabited, weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. The breaking point came during a routine training exercise at Fort Bragg, a simulated ambush using blank ammunition and smoke grenades. The moment the first